graffiti being sprayed all over the place, which is why the work that each and every one of you have been doing over the last number of months during your summer has been so important. And I just want to thank each and every one of you who are on the task force for spending your summer working on these issues. We know that you've been giving up a lot of your time, because I know that each of the cohorts have been meeting regularly to talk about the issues with members of the community and amongst yourselves. And tonight is, one of the first report outs, and it'll be with the Jewish community. And I know that there are a number of other folks who are joining us, colleagues of mine and Montgomery County, who are joining us. I see Councilmember Kate Stewart is here. Thank you, Councilmember, for joining us. I see Delegate Joe Vogel is here. Thank you, Delegate. I believe that there are representatives from a number of other colleagues as well, from Council Vice President Friedson and Councilmember Albornoz and Jawando's office, who might be with us. And then some ex officio members, Ken Hartman, who's representing the county executive, and Damon Monteliano, who is representing MCPS, and Superintendent McKnight. And so, I'm here because I want to listen. I know that we'll be having a full report out in November, but I'm going to be attending as many of these individual cohort meetings as possible, because the work that you've been doing is so incredibly important. And so, again, the daily news is a reminder of why we do this work. And so from the bottom of my heart, and I will speak on behalf of so many people in our community, thank you. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Selena or Bertha.
Thank you, Council President Glass. Just wanted to share a couple of reminders I put in the last couple of emails to you all, the ethics and parliamentary and the Maryland Open Meetings Act trainings that need to be done. Most of you have already sent that to us. You have 90 days to do it from when you were appointed by the council, and that 90 days ends on September 22nd. So now I'm going to toss it over to Meredith Weisel, who is going to present, along with the Jewish cohort, their report. Meredith?
Thank you, Selena, and everyone for being here tonight. I'm going to share my screen in a second. We actually put together some PowerPoint slides to give a little bit of history of anti-Semitism and some background before we present some recommendations that we have as well. I want to acknowledge, I know the council president said it. It has been a really hard couple of days. First day of school. There was also an incident at a school in MCPS of anti-Semitism, and with everything that has been happening, there's also been several bomb threats that we've seen several institutions having, including a high school and the National Zoo today. And so this is really why we do this work and why we are all here. And so I just want to acknowledge that up front. And I realize that a lot of our communities are probably hurting a little bit here. And so I just want to kind of put that really out there and really appreciate everybody's work for doing this. And so with that, we're going to go through the presentation. I'm mostly going to be talking, but I'm going to acknowledge our other members of the Jewish cohort and may call on them for a couple of different portions. And then I think, Selena, we're going to wait and do questions at the end, correct? After? Perfect. Great. Okay, so just give me 1 second. Let me share my screen and let me start the slideshow. Okay, can somebody just give me a thumbs up? You can see the slides, not the notes, just to make it easier for everybody. We're good?
Yes, we can see.
Okay, great. So the Jewish cohort members, myself, Alan Ronkin, Alex Stone, Ron Halber, and Rabbi Sue Shankman. I do not believe Rabbi Shankman could make it this evening, but I do want to acknowledge that she is part of this. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to go through a little bit of the history of anti-Semitism. When we talk about various forms of hate, it's really important to understand the background and where it comes from. And anti-Semitism, for a lot of us, we talk about it, it's called the oldest hatred. We have seen throughout history, anti-Semitism leads to a lot of other forms of hate and extremism that exist out there. And so we want to just give a little bit of a background on anti-Semitism and some of the definitions, understanding where it comes from, the stereotypes, some conspiracy theories, and really how it has become normalized, unfortunately, in our community today. And that's why we're seeing some of the issues. And so with that, these are just some definitions. Full disclosure, I live in Montgomery County. I am a Jewish community member. I also am the regional director for the Anti-Defamation League. So I do this in a professional capacity as well. And the ADL is a leading anti-hate organization. Alan Ronkin, also full disclosure, works for the American Jewish Committee, and Ron Halber works for the Jewish Community Relations Council. So we are also not only members of this community, but we are professionals who are working on a lot of these issues. So we are also happy to answer questions related to that. So just again, real quick, anti-Semitism. Well, we know anti-Semitism has a lot of commonalities with a lot of forms of racism and Islamophobia and misogyny and other forms of hate. Anti-Semitism also has a little bit of unique characteristics and set of traits. And it is a form of prejudice. You can read on the screen, but that is directed towards Jews as individuals or a group. A lot of times it is also based on stereotypes and myths, and we're going to give a couple of examples of that, but it's related to Jewish people individually, religious practices, their beliefs. We also know a lot of it comes from historical tropes that we are also seeing showing up in contemporary ways today. And the reality is that a lot of Jewish people have a connection to the state of Israel. And unfortunately, globally, and including the United States, we see a conflation. And we see a delegitimization, a demonization, and a double standard applied to the state of Israel, and it impacting people here in the United States. And so, as you can see, marginalization, oppression of people who are Jewish. And when we talk about a lot of this, we see different definitions and examples. And we see, just to break it down a little more, hatred towards Jews, stereotypes and scapegoating, the Holocaust denial and Holocaust comparisons, and you will see some images. And I also want to say, full disclosure, some of the images are hard to see, and I know we are live streaming, so I just want to make sure that people understand these are real images, and they can have an impact and a reaction to people, so I do want to acknowledge that can be a little bit hard here. Then also inappropriately invoking Israel. What that means is also there are common myths and stereotypes, and a lot of these are what we call tropes, where when we talk about myths and stereotypes of Jewish people, there are many that are out there. This is a sampling of some of them. And so what sometimes you will hear saying Jews control the media, or Jews control Congress, Jews have too much power, the globalists. These are phrases that are used, essentially trying to say that Jews control the world in many respects. We see a lot of things related to what's called disloyalty, saying Jews are disloyal, they can't be trusted. They hold allegiance only to the Jewish people and don't care about anybody else. We see phrases related to greed, calling Jews money grubbers. This is also why sometimes you may have heard stories of Jews having pennies thrown at them. That, unfortunately, we have seen happen in our schools here in Montgomery County. Jewish deicide is where the belief that Jews killed Jesus Christ. And this is something, even though for centuries we know that this was a myth that has been perpetuated, historians have said this is not true. We have even seen the Vatican disprove this, but we still see people conflating it. And you will hear, unfortunately, we've had it in schools. We've heard people yelled it down the street saying, you're a Jew, you killed Jesus Christ. And there are people who say that's the reason why, Christmas was ruined in the United States. These are just phrases and things that we've heard people say. Blood libel, just a little background real quick, is the belief that Jews murder non-Jews. Sometimes they say have murdered Christian children to perform religious rituals, including the baking of matzah. We also see this conflated related to the state of Israel, saying that Jews globally or Israelis are murdering Palestinian children and harvesting their organs. It's just different stereotypes. This is different conspiracy theories. We see a lot of things related to saying the Holocaust didn't happen or Holocaust distortion. And I'm going to show you some images later specifically on how we're seeing Holocaust distortion, particularly related to the COVID pandemic. And then we also see a conflation of downplaying the history of the Jewish nationhood and its connection to the land of Israel. And we're going to show you a couple of things on that. This is not, I want full disclosure, this is not a discussion about Middle East politics in any way, shape, or form, but it's when we see the conflation of something the Israeli government may have decided to do and people blaming Jews in the United States. And we can talk about that a little bit more, but unfortunately we are seeing that happening here in Montgomery County sometimes. We also thought it would be really important to give just a little bit of a background on understanding Judaism and the Jewish community. The Jewish community is not a monolith, and these are some incredible images. These are actually some images the American Jewish Committee has put forward, and you can see Jews come in all races. Jews come in all different backgrounds. One can actually be atheist and still be Jewish. So there are different people who practice in different ways. There are people who may light Shabbat candles every Friday. There are people who may never light Shabbat candles. We want to just have an understanding that not everybody looks the same. And the Jewish community is not a monolith. And it's really important just to understand that and the background when we're talking about Judaism, which is why it's not just always a religion-based crime when we see hate crimes. It's also important to understand, and we're going to get into more granular specific to Montgomery County, but that the world Jewish population is about 15.2 million. And before the Holocaust, it was actually 16.5 million. So Jews really make up a very small percentage. And breaking that down even further into Montgomery County and into the United States, so about 7.2 million Jews are in the United States, just under 2%. 10% of the local population here, about 120,000. Some more numbers that actually I want to acknowledge Ron was able to look up for us, that 2% grew up in Russian-speaking households, 1% of Jewish adults in the DC area are actually also Holocaust survivors, and that's a really important thing to remember here. And then also right above that, 8 to 15%, over a million in the United States are also Jews of color. And that's why we wanted to present the slides specifically talking about and showing that Jews come in all shapes and sizes, so to speak. And Montgomery County is really a very vibrant area where we have a very active Jewish community. Particularly, a lot of people do attend synagogue here or are affiliated with the Jewish Community Center or are involved with various other Jewish organizations as well. So what we're really, the meat of this is trying to understand so we can make recommendations is how are we seeing anti-Semitism manifesting today? Meaning what are we actually seeing? So the first couple of things that we thought we would present are specific to numbers. So ADL is an organization and the American Jewish Committee who both put together different numbers about anti-Semitic incidents. And what ADL specifically, we do an audit every year. The 2022 numbers on a national scale saw the largest number of anti-Semitic incidents in 4 decades. There was close to 4,000 incidents. It was 3,697 incidents. And it breaks down even further just to understand the numbers that we're seeing. So 111, it says violent assaults. And we're going to, like I said, we're going to get a little granular here specific to Maryland and Montgomery County. Harassment incidents was about 2,300 incidents. And the concerning part about harassment is that, so a lot of the incidents that you hear happening in the community are harassment. And we know, unfortunately, harassment of any form of hate can also lead to physical violence. And that is why it's concerning the higher these numbers are going. And what we're seeing is a lot of vandalism as well. And we just, as Council President said at the very beginning, we just had another incident of anti-Semitic vandalism in Montgomery County, in the North Bethesda area. That is a huge percentage of the incidents that we are seeing as well. And that is continually increasing. I want to have Alan Alan, are you actually on now? I know you were having trouble getting on, but if Alan, if you're on here, perfect. Can you just chime in specifically on the next two slides about what American Jews are seeing and being targeted?
Sure. Well, thanks, Meredith. American Jewish Committee each year puts together a survey on the experiences and perceptions of anti-Semitism among the American Jewish community and also the general public. And you can see here that a significant portion, almost 1 in 4, said that the Jewish institutions that they're affiliated with have been targeted by anti-Semitism over the last 5 years. And you can see also over here the how it breaks down, whether it's straight up attacks or threats, even graffiti. And you can see how that obviously impacts the community. I can go to the next slide, Meredith. 25% report having been the target of anti-Semitism over the past year. And I can extrapolate a little bit from that and give you one other statistic. 85% of Jews between 18 and 29 have experienced anti-Semitism online within the last year. 26% of them felt personally, actually physically threatened. So it's not something that is rare, unfortunately, particularly among young people. We find that young people are more likely to be targets of anti-Semitism. Don't know why exactly, but that's what we're seeing in our research. Go ahead, Mary.
Great. Yep. Thanks, Alan. So the next thing we wanted to just highlight is more specific to Maryland. So in Maryland, there were, and this is statewide, it was 109 anti-Semitic incidents were reported. And you will hear when we talk about this, myself, Alan, Ron, Alec, or Rabbi Shankman, she's not on here right now, that when we say reported, because we know that anti-Semitic incidents and honestly a lot of other forms of hate and bias incidents are underreported in our communities. So it's really important. That's one of the things that this task force should be looking at is how do we do a better job in making sure that we're advocating for communities to report incidents. So just back to the numbers, 109 anti-Semitic incidents were reported. More than 50% were in Montgomery County in 2022. There were 63 incidents of harassment, 43 incidents of vandalism, and 3 incidents of assault. The concerning about assault, again, and this is reported, was that there were 0 in 2021. And so we're going to show you some examples. There's some of the slides that have some images that we pulled to show you some of the examples of what we're seeing. What we also know is that the state of Maryland was the 10th highest number of anti-Semitic incidents reported in the country for 2022. Now, yes, as we've said, is a huge Jewish population here, and we certainly know that has some of the impact, but we also do know that it is still happening, and we are seeing this, again, as we said, we just saw 2 new incidents happen just recently. With that, we're going to show you some images. And again, I want to be really, really clear. Some of these images can be hard to see. So I just want to acknowledge that as we're going through it. So, and Alan, this is a couple of the images you sent me. If you want to kind of just highlight them and I'll click through them.
Sure. So here we have Minister Louis Farrakhan, who has made many anti-Semitic statements over the years, using the trope of Jews being subhuman, of being termites. The next slide, we can see here this week, or last couple of weeks, we have a presidential candidate who was suggesting that COVID was designed, as you can see here. Here we have a anti-Israel protest where the van says Hitler was right. And here we can talk about Colleyville, was the Texas standoff where someone came and invaded a synagogue, held people hostage for a number of hours. Luckily, everybody was okay. And of course, we all recognize this image from Charlottesville, where the crowd shouted, "Jews will not replace us," which of course correlates to the Great Replacement theory, in which the conspiracy is that Jews somehow are plotting to control the United States by replacing white people with black and brown people and taking their jobs. We could go on and on. So I think those are the images on this slide. Is that right, Meredith?
Yes, correct. Thank you, Alan. This next one, this is more specific to some things here. So one, this was from a news article, I believe this is from the Washington Post, talking about workplaces. And one of the recommendations that we're going to talk about in a little bit that we have is related to workplace and also county employees. But we are seeing more Jewish employees who are experiencing more overt discrimination specifically happening. The next two images, this is actually a case that is still making its way through the courts right now in Montgomery County. In our system, there was an individual who was attacked in a giant grocery store in the Gaithersburg area by a couple of different individuals. They saw that he was wearing a Jewish star. They were being disorderly in the giant supermarket and throwing things like fruit and hitting other people. And he asked them to stop. And when they saw that he had a Jewish star, they specifically started spewing anti-Semitic slurs and comments and started yelling, "Do it for Kanye." And we all know that Kanye West had made some very specific anti-Semitic comments on Twitter about around this time. And so this was a specific example of an assault that happened here in our community. Couple of other images. We have unfortunately seen there's a thing called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is a very long history and an entire thing that we could do a presentation on, but it's an anti-Semitic book that alleges there's a Jewish cabal that controls the world. And so this goes back to some of the stereotypes. And a Capitol Police officer several years ago was found with a copy of this book specifically in their drawer. And then we also, a lot of people know, and there may be people on this call who received it, we have continuously seeing anti-Semitic flyers left on synagogue members' porches that are spewing anti-Semitic and racist and actually anti-LGBTQ plus hate. And we are unfortunately continuing to see a lot of this. The next one is an image of specifically the Bethesda trolley trail. And actually, Alan and Ron, do you both, I think it might be good if both of you just make a couple of comments on the Bethesda trolley trail incident, because I know all of us worked on this. So Alan, do you want to go first and then Ron?
Sure. I think it's pretty clear what we saw here. And it was incredibly horrifying and I think terrifying for the folks in the community to see this kind of an image. And I want to commend members of the council and the county executive who spoke out promptly about this issue. But you can see here in our community, 91% of the bias attacks against on a religious basis were against Jews, and that was in 2022. Ron, do you want to say a word or two?
Thanks, Alan, and thank you, Meredith, so far for everything you've prepared and presented. The thing that shocked me the most was that a child was actually the one who reported seeing this. And think about it, was a Jewish kid who ended up seeing this and ended up reporting it to their parents. And I would say that what was interesting about this event was how spontaneous the Jewish community and others came out to show their opposition. Like by that evening, there were over 250 people out for a media event that happened naturally. We have spent a lot of time at JCRC, specifically working in the schools and law enforcement. And this year in our community, we responded in the greater Washington area, with the majority of them being in Montgomery County Public Schools, to over 70 incidents of anti-Semitism. And this simply, I don't know how to put it, but it's not acceptable. It never was, it never will be. And the Jewish community won't stand for its acceptance. We won't stand for a time when our children have to be afraid for who they are, what they believe in. And just to add one other thing about this one was particularly graphic. And I don't know if it was the police, the parks department, we've always found the great parkers, they removed the graffiti. They don't even, half the time we call and the graffiti is already underway being removed. We really appreciate that proactive law enforcement. But we have a problem in this county, and I've been working in this field for 25 years in this area, and we are not an island of that has walls protecting against bigotry. It's well and alive here, and this is just one incident, but I'll add other things. But specifically to this incident, I was surprised by the spontaneity of people who came out right away because they were so offended by it because it was so visible.
Thanks, Ron. So I know we only have about 10 minutes or so I want to just get through a couple of the other slides. So you heard from Montgomery County Public Schools specifically, and this was just one of, again, another headline of specifically, and there were way more than this, but this was just one specific right after a weekend. I don't know if this is going to play because I don't remember if I shared audio, but let me know if you can hear this. This is actually a reaction from a student after a swastika was on a desk.
Nope.
Were you able to hear it?
No.
All right, my audio isn't working, so I will try and get it to play after. So these are a couple of other images. As we mentioned, Alan talked about what Robert F. Kennedy specifically said, or the current elected official specifically about COVID. What we have unfortunately saw during COVID, and this applies to both the Jewish community and the Asian American Pacific Islander community, we saw a lot of conspiracy theories saying that the Jewish community created a virus, conspired with the Chinese community specifically, or with China, to create a virus, to release it into the world, to get everybody sick, and specifically the Jewish community helped so that they could create a vaccine and profit off of it. And so what you hear in that is a lot of COVID conspiracy theories that, Jews control the world. You can see another Jewish world utter hoax. We started people saying, well, I'm not going to get vaccinated and I'm going to wear a yellow star, just like Jews were forced to during the Holocaust. That is Holocaust distortion. And unfortunately, we saw some of that here in Montgomery County as well. Also specifically, I want to just highlight anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. And Zionism, just as a really quick thing, it is the belief in the Jewish self-determination to have a Jewish state, that Jewish people have a homeland. And on the next slide, it's going to talk a little bit more about that. But what we see is in the United States, and we have seen Jewish students targeted by this in the schools, saying, if you're a Zionist, you're racist. Zionism is racism, and conflating something that the Israeli government policy may have made and saying that Jews here are responsible for that. That is the short version of this, but we do see it impacting anti-Semitism here in our communities. Alan, I'm just going to go real quick so we can get to the recommendation. Yep. So
keep going.
9 in 10 Americans, both Jews and non-Jews, also believe that saying that Israel has no right to exist is anti-Semitic. So this has been talked about in studies. So with that, we want to just also highlight how anti-Semitism impacts other forms of hate. And really the question was, how do we create a zero tolerance society? It's a really lofty goal. I don't know, what we're going to be able to do, but that is why we were in this fight. And we are seeing a lot of factors contributing to the rise of anti-Semitism and other forms of hate. We have seen this mainstream, normalized. We're seeing a lot of polarization and anxiety. Social media has had an entire impact, and there are certainly things that a local government may not be able to do, but we can ask our federal government to take actions on what social media companies are allowing. And we do see a lot of politicization, and this is not getting into politics of things, but this just is saying the political center in our communities has become weakened, and we are seeing extreme ideologies grow coming from all angles. We are also seeing a tremendous amount of white supremacist propaganda, and some of it we have seen more recently again. These are just more images of the ways we're seeing anti-Semitism and extremism show up. And these are the impacts. One of the things we wanted to note, the impacts of extremism. Anti-Semitism specifically fits into this is a sampling. That's why it says sampling. There are a lot of other hate groups out there, but anti-Semitism fits into a lot of these ideologies. And what we see is that when they hate the Jewish community, they tend to hate other marginalized groups. And so a lot of these people who are involved in different extremist groups are not just targeting Jewish community, they're targeting others. And we have seen this throughout history, and we wanted to acknowledge that. And we realized the Jewish cohort is going first. And so we also wanted to just set the tone to understand how a lot of these forms of hate are specifically tied in together. And with that, so what do we do? So a lot of what the Jewish cohort talked about is we know we need to be doing a better job in educating, but that doesn't just mean K through 12 schools. You know, we talked a lot about how can the county increase awareness and understanding about these types of hate crimes and bias incidents that we're seeing. And notice we say hate crimes and bias incidents because you heard Attorney McCarthy talk about this. Not everything rises to the legal definition of a hate crime. That doesn't mean bias incidents are not impacting our communities. We talked about workplaces, college campuses, and just the community in general. Then the federal government has come up with, the president has come up with a national strategy to counter anti-Semitism, and it comes up with a whole of society approach. And there are many of the organizations on here who are working towards this to really help and urge the community. And it has recommendations in this for state and local authorities, the community leaders, faith leaders, how to take part in this. So when we're talking about educating at school, work, and educating at home, these are just a couple of samplings. And then there's 2 more slides that will show kind of our bottom line recommendations. So increasing community awareness and understanding of anti-Semitism, including its threat to the United States. We need to do a better job of strengthening education about the Jewish community, the Holocaust, and anti-Semitism today. The Holocaust was a chapter, probably the most egregious chapter in a book on anti-Semitism, but anti-Semitism exists back in the Crusades times. It existed in the Middle Ages. It exists today. And so we are continually seeing these patterns, and how do we break the cycles? We need to continue talking about hate and bullying in our schools. We really encourage anti-Semitism in DEI workplace trainings. In other words, learning about anti-Semitism the way we're learning about other forms of hate and discrimination. We really appreciate the County Council, and I know many council members are on here, for recognizing Jewish American Heritage Month for the first time during a proclamation this year. That was incredible, and it's a way to learn about Jewish history as well, because a lot of things, when we see hate, it's because of a misunderstanding of a particular religion or ethnicity or race. Holding things like anti-bias workshops, trainings for county employees in all departments on anti-Semitism, and including anti-Semitism and religious bigotry and anti-discrimination policies. And then really the question is, what is the role of public officials and community leaders, and understanding how important it is for others to speak up, not just the Jewish community in response to anti-Semitism, talking about things like allyship. So we always want people to call it out. We want to make sure, and that's why this task force also is so important, coalition building, everyone having a seat at the table. How do we, as we mentioned in the education, legislating about the Holocaust, but also other forms of genocide in our history, making sure we're not meeting hate with hate. We want to make sure we're building relationships, improving safety and security for the Jewish community, but also other marginalized communities, and also local legislation on how to combat white supremacist propaganda. And with that, our top recommendations, and these are not all inclusive, and I'm sure we could keep talking about more, but I know we're almost up to 30 minutes. So for the county executive and county council specifically, and I know this is small, so I'm going to read it. Training for all county employees. We need to be holding anti-bias workshops and specific trainings for county employees on anti-Semitism. Again, including anti-Semitism and religious bigotry and anti-discrimination policies, and encouraging this for the private workforce as well, not just for the county. I don't know, we can't necessarily require it, but there is certain things that, or maybe we can, but we can strongly encourage it. Looking at local legislation to combat hateful propaganda and flyers. And there are First Amendment concerns here, and there are things that a lot of us on here can help work through, and talking with various attorneys on how we can do this. But that is something we have to combat, because we know people are reading the flyers and believing them. Recognizing Jewish American Heritage Month, we said thank you again for that. We also think it's important to create a strategic and comprehensive community organizational partnership that would meet twice a year, plus continuing the work of this anti-hate task force by holding a month against hate each year, and really diving into what that means. Enhancing security funding for all religious and nonprofit organizations that are at risk of hate crimes. For law enforcement, we specifically think we need to require, and there are state requirements, but there can be more local requirements on hate crimes and extremism for all law enforcement officers and staff, because sometimes staff are the people answering the phones and they're not necessarily, there's a civilian who works in law enforcement, and we want to make sure that they're educated. A hate crimes special liaison branch within MCPD, and potentially a specific hotline that is just for something like a hate and bias incident. And for MCPS, we talked about some of this about legislating about education about the Holocaust and other genocides, but also requiring trainings for MCPS faculty and teachers and the history of anti-Semitism and all forms of hate. And this is something that is happening, that JCRC, ADL, and AJC are doing some of this work as well, but there is more that can be done. And with that, I just want to thank everybody for listening again. This was the Jewish cohort members. I know I did a lot of the talking, but this was a collaborative effort of all of us working together. And I will stop sharing so that we can answer questions. How do we want to do questions? I'm looking at Selena and Bertha. Tell me how we want to do this.
Well, first of all, thank you for that presentation. The recommendations, of course, but also the background, the tropes, what anti-Semitism is, what's happening on the national, the state, and the local level. That was all, I think, really helpful. I think most of you, if not all of you, know that I'm Selena Mendy-Singleton, the Racial Equity Manager for the Council. And I see now that Bertha's back. I know that she was bouncing in and out. If she just wants to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Berta Lidia Cersosimo, Multicultural Communications and Outreach Manager for the County Council. I guess I'll just say that as far as taking in questions, if anybody has any, raise your hand, and then we will ask you to unmute. The chat, it's also enabled if you want to type your question, and then we can read it out loud.
Also, just want to acknowledge that Council Member Andrew Friedson has joined us.
Thank you. Okay, I see Mr. Ron Wright from our Black African American cohort has a question.
Yes, good evening, everybody. And greetings to Council President Glass and also our other council members in attendance. Congratulations, Meredith. It was an excellent presentation. And I learned a lot, but I learned more about what I don't know about the Jewish community. And I think the education piece is essential, and probably to all of our cohort presentations. I do have a question. The first question is, I think it was Ron that made the reference to Jewish institutions. So I've been laboring of the assumption that the only institution is the synagogue. So can you enumerate the other ones where you are experiencing incidents of hate?
Well, first of all, the JCRC is the umbrella organization for the local Jewish community. So unless there's somebody who is a member who I don't know, but just about every synagogue, every Jewish school, every Jewish agency that provides services is a member of our organization. And so we've seen most of the anti-Semitism that we've seen, obviously, when we think about institutionally manifests itself in schools, but we also hear about in case of discrimination in the workforce and things like that, not at the Jewish facilities, but we hear about it in the community. And when we worked with Councilmember Friedson and Councilmember Katz and Councilmember Albernas to form the security grant program a few years ago, we wanted to make sure that it wasn't just limited to houses of worship, but we wanted it available for all, because we want to make sure that no matter what community, if there's an African-American health facility or an LGBT community center or any nonprofit facility that is attached to a culture, a faith, an ethnicity, that they have dollars available to protect themselves. And what made this program unique is that it's the first, as far as we know, the only grant program on the local level in the United States that provides security money to nonprofit institutions. There's 19 states where it is, and we've worked to create these programs on the state level in Virginia and in Maryland, but only on the local level. The problem is this program has been so oversubscribed to that the give out to any, I think last time was 16,000 or about 80% of the 20,000 pool. And we first we first worked on creating this program 4 years ago. We wondered how many people were going to apply. Well, the answer is a ton. And we need to put more money in the program. So number one, everybody can get the full 20, and they need more because while most of these state grant programs are eligible for one-time funding for operational or for capital grants, the real thing we know that deters people from committing an anti-Semitic incident is the presence of law enforcement outside of a synagogue. So the more law security personnel that we can hire to stand at institutions. Unfortunately, to quote Mark Elrich, I wish we could spend that money on social services and other things, but the primary responsibility of government is to keep all of its citizens safe. And when you look at $700,000 or $800,000, it's a rounding error in a $6 billion budget. And we need to increase that so that any group that is fearing any threat to their safety at any time can have some money to hire off-duty police officers or security personnel during times of high concentration.
And lastly, if I may, again, a wonderful presentation, and also the recommendations are taken to heart as well. Specifically as a couple of the, if you will, foundational problems kind of assigned to two significant African Americans. And my question would be, what would be the Jewish cohort's expectation for the Black and African American community to respond to these types of antagonism from individuals such as these? What do you expect from us and how should we respond to help?
You know, I don't think the African American group or American society has any more responsibility than any other group to respond to acts of bias or discrimination. I think it's a moral responsibility and ethical responsibility for all people of good faith, regardless of what background, to speak out against it, because it depends on the society we're going to create. And whenever you have a rally together, and some people say, oh, another rally, but you know something, to echo what Meredith said, those rallies are important. It's important that every time there's an incident, it becomes denounced, because as Meredith said, and my colleague and everybody has said, we cannot permit this to become normally accepted attitudinal behavior. In the end, racism, bigotry, or anti-Semitism, it's an opinion. It's a conspiratorial opinion, but it's a thought. And unchecked thoughts, we've seen in society how demagoguery, unchecked demagoguery, or unchecked populism, or unchecked vicious hate, people believe anything if it's repeated over and over again. Somehow they lose the ability to filter out the garbage. And we've seen that in our own country, in our own history, towards not just Jews, but to all groups. And so therefore, it may get tiring, but every time there's an incident, I believe we need to denounce it forcefully. And because, one last point, anti-Semitism, like other forms of hatred, waxes and wanes and ebbs and flows, choose your metaphor. And it happens over and over and over again. What's unique to anti-Semitism, it's the most flexible form of hatred. We have COVID, it's the reason it's raining, it's the reason why we have blue skies, it's the reason why the economy is failing, it's the reason why the economy is doing great, the reason why people use it to explain any situation that they can't intellectually wrap their hands around, which is why it makes it so damn dangerous, because it manifests itself generationally. The one thing that I'm concerned about is that, well, I know this was intended to be a temporary mechanism. If we're going to fight hate in this county and we're truly going to make Montgomery County unique, it has to be a multi-generational priority of our community. It can't say, oh, 3 things from now, bigotry is down, crime is down. No.
Yeah.
Generational, and all parts of society should be focused on it. so that regardless, is at a high point or at a low point, it remains a priority. And I think Meredith wanted to add.
Yeah, what I was just gonna say, so one of the things that we talked about a lot, and I know I went through it a little quickly, but the extremism that has been growing in all directions, I sometimes call it like a Willy Wonka elevator, it's up, down, right, left, sideways, this ways, that ways. It has become so normalized in our society right now that it doesn't matter where, it matters where the hate is coming from, but that's why one of the things we felt so strongly about was the coalition building. So it's not just when an individual incident happens, we're gonna call it out and we're gonna be there for each other, but the hard work that really has to get done. And that's why we felt that if we could, if it's extending the anti-hate task force or having where these cohorts are getting together more, we can be the leaders in our community trying to bring together. I've gone into some of the Black churches in our community who have asked me, can you talk about white supremacy? And just let us know what you're seeing, because we know that it impacts, the Jewish community, it impacts the Black community, it impacts. And so, me as a white Jewish woman who works for a leading anti-hate organization is going in and talking about with them. That alone is the hard work. And that's really where some of this comes down to. So that's really, I think, where it comes. And we need to be doing this with our kids in a certain way with anti-bias trainings for them, but really the coalition work after the fact, like that needs to be, and that is something the county can help lead, with us by creating, something further. Yeah. So I agree with you.
So
I think there's.
You indulge me just one more, Meredith, and
Sure.
that is, again, this educational piece is very important. And I wonder whether or not you envision, as we are really, as the Council President Glass has framed this, in a state of emergency.
Yeah.
So what are the things that you recommended that we need to do now? Because one of the things I'm thinking about is that we need to change the hearts and minds of the perpetrators. So when they are caught, what, if any, educational opportunity are they provided to learn about anti-Semitism and dissuade them from further acting in that regard?
So that is probably a larger answer than now, but what I will say is the short answer to that is, so I think let's just use a student, for example, somebody who is under the age of 18 or 18. A lot of times there are things coming from a place of ignorance. They are not necessarily part of an extremist group. They're not affiliated where, they are part of that. That is where we can use education. You can do a trip to something like the Holocaust, the African American Museum, down in DC. We are fortunate where we live. There are tools that we can and strategies we can use to break that cycle so that, 15-year-old, 16-year-old, 17-year-old doesn't become in their 20s and affiliates with a group like the Proud Boys or the Oath Keepers. We want to break that cycle. And there are things that we can be doing. That is a huge part of that. And I know Ariane asked in the chat, and I think this goes to your question too, about, she said she was interested in the recommendation about a community partnership that would meet 2 times a year and then a continuing of doing a month against hate. That's when I think we can be doing some of that too, and finding out what is happening and how can we reverse some of that. So I think it's a combination of all of it. And it's an excellent question.
Thank you. Nazneen Saifi from the AAPI cohort. I see your hand is up.
Yeah, good evening. Thank you for the really informative talk and points and everything. I just had a really quick question. I'm not sure if you are able to answer it now, but I'd be interested in knowing how many incidents were in 2018, 2019 versus 2020 and 2021, because I feel as if that there may have been a decrease in incidents because of the pandemic and because of the stay-at-home orders. So I'd be interested to know what the comparison is for those years to now. And even prior to 2016, because of the presidential election and everything that happened after that.
Yeah, I can definitely answer it. I don't have it on hand, but I will say since about 2015, even before the 2016 election, the numbers have consistently gone up. Just some years have gone up at a more rapid pace, but I can definitely provide that data. The FBI hate crimes data, we can look at that for beyond just the anti-Semitism, and I can provide that specifically for anti-Semitism, but it has in the past five years, it has definitely increased every year, even during the pandemic, because we did actually see a lot of incidents on social media and online. And then when certainly things opened up, we continued to see more. So it hasn't necessarily gone down where it was significant enough, unfortunately.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Paula Bienenfeld. Did you have a question?
Yes, hi. Yeah, I'm with the Montgomery County Jewish Parents Coalition. And last summer, we organized a small group of students and their parents who had actually been subject to a lot of this harassment. And I just wanted to say a little bit about what the students were saying, what happened to them. And some of the language I apologize for, but one of the girls said that starting as far back as first grade, she was being called a dirty Jew. And at the time, the administration really didn't do anything. And there's another kid who said starting in the 7th grade, and again, apologies for the language, said he was being called a Jewish fuck over and over again, harassed almost daily. And that one of the teachers in the 9th grade, his English teacher, brought up how the Hebrews killed the Jews. So this is kind of more a question for Evan, but I think we really need to cut to the chase here and stop saying, as Ron pointed out, there is hate in this county, and we need to develop some really serious, steps to end it. And I appreciate what Meredith said, but I think a month against hate is also just one of these sort of community conversations, and the Jewish community is really fed up. I mean, I don't think we're scared, and I don't think we're terrified. We're very angry. And I'm sure, Meredith and Ron and everyone on the committee realizes that. But I'd like to kind of throw it to Evan. I hope I'm not putting you on the spot, Councilmember Glass, but we need something real, Thank you.
Well, Paula, thank you for your engagement. I appreciate the question via Zoom as opposed to Twitter. So I very much appreciate that. The reality is we're having this conversation to develop these ideas, and the thoughtful conversation and comments and questions people are asking will help us get to some place. And as a Jew myself, I feel your frustration and the concerns that people have. And what I would ask of you in kind is, if you have any additional ideas, reach out to me. You know my email, my multiple emails. And please share it also with Selena and Bertha, and we can disseminate this, because as we go through this process and have the report outs from the various cohorts over the next few weeks and months, we will be compiling one report with a whole lot of ideas, and we welcome your thoughts.
Thank you.
I just want to add, Paula, thank you. And I know we've had conversations about this too, and we appreciate your input. I want to just be very realistic though. We can't legislate away hate. That is a really difficult thing. And I think anybody on this call would agree. But what we can do is we can make strong recommendations to try and suppress a lot of it. And without question, I talk to the students every day. My kids are in MCPS. One just graduated. I hear it. I'm sorry I wasn't able to play the audio that we had. That was some of the statements like what you had of a student. We are talking with them. We are trying to work with MCPS on better policies and processes through that. I know Andrew Winter has his hand raised, and he is actually a principal in MCPS who is leading the charge with faculty on some of this as well. So so anything you have, you can send to me as well. We did talk about a lot of that, but we tried to streamline as much as we could, at least for tonight. So I just want to say that.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you. Andrew Winter?
Yeah, so good evening, everyone. I represent the Montgomery County Jewish Educators Alliance, and I really do greatly appreciate the work of this task force and tonight's presentation. Kind of aligned with what Paula was just saying, with respect to the recommendations. I'm really glad to see the recommendations of training for MCPS staff and the recommendation of to legislate education about the Holocaust and other genocides. But I do wonder if there are thoughts or potential recommendations on how to teach students about anti-Semitism, both proactively and afterwards, if and when acts of anti-Semitism occurs with students of various ages and grade levels. I didn't know if there was any thoughts about that, Meredith.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely talked about that too. And I think some of that is being done. So, we were trying to be careful because some of us work for organizations that do some of this work, and, just being careful to not to put on our community hat as well. But Alan is still on here too. Alan and I work with a lot of youth, and we've definitely been talking about trainings that we can do. I don't know that it's that it may be something more MCPS than the county.
Okay.
Like the county council could recommend, but there could be things the county could host, events for youth to learn and educate about, anti-Semitism. So I think that is a really good point, and I think that's something we should definitely expand on, and seeing what the county's role is in that. But yeah, Alan, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, I think you really covered it, Meredith. I think the thing that we need to keep in mind is that we are never going to eradicate any form of bigotry, whether it's anti-Semitism or anything else. I think our task as residents of this county, as members of this group, is to denormalize, is to get this garbage back to the fringes of society, where it's no longer socially acceptable to be talking about these things, whether you're in school or whether you're in polite company or whether you're at the water fountain. And that we can do. We know that we can do this because it's happened before. This stuff has, like Ron said earlier, it ebbs and it flows. We can set up the environment to marginalize this kind of garbage, and I think that's really where we have to aim, and measure our success.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. And then we'll have time for 2 more questions. I see Joseph Hooks from our African American Black cohort.
Hello, good evening, everybody. I won't take too much time. I was very impressed with the presentation. I want to touch base and just reiterate, like maybe at the federal level, but I think, I forgot the minister's name. When people don't know, they use this as a way to come up with their own conspiracy or ways to justify. And I want to touch on a little bit of the Kanye situation, just going from the lens that I hear. But it goes back to education first. So how much, when we talk about MCPS, were you guys able to connect with them to see, I know you recommended about the Holocaust, but what content, I graduated 20 years ago, what is being taught in the schools? Because I think from that, we try to guard students from what they are learning about different communities and different times of the month, that it allows them to formulate their own opinions and feel either hate or uninformed information to create incidents. So were you guys able to get any deep, look or scope at what is actually being taught? I know you said you have some kids in MCPS.
Yeah, so we, several different organizations just on a national basis have been looking at all states, and there's less than 20 states that actually mandate Holocaust education and actually other forms of genocide. And we're seeing now restrictions on what actually can be taught in a lot of states. In the state of Maryland, it's actually not required, but we have been working with the State Board of Education in trying to enhance the curriculum specifically. Okay. And the Holocaust, the U.S. Holocaust Museum recommends ages 4th grade and up at an age appropriate level. It's
Mhm.
very, very specific, though. You're not going to teach a 10th grader what you're going to teach a 4th grader necessarily. And so we've been working with them. MCPS has done a better job than some other counties also as well. And I know Andrew's shaking his head as a principal, in MCPS. And so we have been working with them on that. They are looking at, the MCPS is specifically looking at the history curriculum and what is taught, the social studies curriculum right now, and are looking at ways to incorporate not just about the Holocaust, but what does that actually mean for today? So translating it for kids into what that means today. And so that is something that, yes, I know ADL, AJC, JCRC, and a few others have definitely had conversations with them about that. Yeah, without question, because some of it actually they weren't doing as much as they probably should have been.
Yeah, that's awesome. Because then I'll go back with the Kanye thing. You know, I grew up with actually, I want to say a little bit of opposite, was to get to know and always have maybe a friend in the Jewish community. You know, if it's through banking or business, that was pushed on not to say my mother, but just in my community, or my, in the streets, of having a Jewish family or friend. My godparents are Jewish, and so I grew up just being loved by them. And so I think the uneducated information they get or see through social media, that they're like, oh, this is for Kanye, because when they see that if a black man did something wrong and was financially hit, they get more angry, because sometimes they might assume that when, let's say, something happens to some African American, that financially things didn't really crumble like the way it did for Kanye. So then they build up this animosity for just uneducated reasons, and say, well, someone could do something to a black man and then no one loses their multi-million, billion-dollar business. And so I think just they're being obnoxious and sad they assaulted someone totally. I think if we continue to educate them on sometimes current news, like one of my favorite teachers in history, Mr. Torrance from Walker's Mill, would stop and say, look, this is what happened in the news, let's talk about it.
Yeah.
But like I said, when I first met you all, it's not what they teach, it's how they teach it. And so working with MCPS to say, if you're in these 4th and up grades, how were you implementing this information to educate kids so that they are making a more valid opinion, or learning about each other? Because the strengths, and there's so much strength from all the communities, specifically even the Jewish. So I think, and I won't speak for our council, but I see that there's a uprising, like, what your community and Jewish people went through was so tough. But then looking at the African Americans, like what we've suffered through, sometimes we feel like we're not getting the same apology or support. We're not as, even I'll just say authentically, I don't believe we're even as strong of, we're a little more siloed, in my opinion, just speaking for myself, Joseph Hooks. And so I think this is a beautiful thing that we're all coming together and be the example to show that we're all anti against these hate crimes. So that was it. I'm really looking forward to connecting with MCPS for us. And I just wanted to hear what you all were able to do. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And the only thing I will just chime in on, so a lot of, I think, the anti-hate task force being put together and having the different cohorts is so we can break down some of those barriers. The Kanye example, I use that one because it was Montgomery County, and what it shows is, so somebody like Kanye West, wherever people feel about him, he made some anti-Semitic comments on social media with 30 million followers. And as I said, there's only 15 million Jewish people worldwide. So when youth does hear something like that, it has an impact. So how do we counter that narrative and saying, no, not all Jewish people are wealthy. Not all Jewish people, work in banks. Not all Jewish people work in this, this industry or in Hollywood. That was another thing that has come up before. So, how do we do a better job? And I think that, that court case is still, as I said, being worked on, but it was the impact of what somebody said and what it impacted youth here in our community. And so where did we fail, as a society, that they were 19-year-olds feel they needed to attack a Jewish man because of that. And I think that's what this task force can really make recommendations on. So thank you. I appreciate your comments.
Let me add one more thing, if I could. I think there's this temptation sometimes to enter into almost what we call an oppression Olympics. Which group has suffered more. And I think we have to reject that as a paradigm. Every group that's represented here in this task force has its own history, has its own conspiracies, has its own language of oppression. Some, have suffered. Everyone has suffered in different ways, and I think when we try to compare them, we do ourselves a disservice. There's a through line of hatred and bigotry that we all have to face, and at the same time, we should look individually at the different forms of hatred and bigotry, and appreciate that they all require a different response. And so I would say, Mr. Hooks, the idea that some group is not heard and things don't happen when something happens with an African American, to me, is outrageous. And we need to do everything we can. And I know that all of the organizations here do the best we can to stand up and speak out and to be good allies when these kinds of things happen, because it is not acceptable for anybody in any group to be targeted in that way. And we got to hold people accountable, no matter what their background, no matter what their faith.
Thank you. We will take one more question from Tiffany Kelly from the Black African American cohort.
Thank you very much. This was a great presentation, and I just wanted to share a couple of thoughts. One from my childhood and one from my adulthood, and I actually did share this in our group. When I was a child, I lived in rural America, very black and white, and that was it. And the Black children, I was in elementary school, we'd make negative comments about white people. Now, if you would have sat me down and asked me if I knew what I was saying, I didn't. I just knew what my friends said, and we all use this term. I believe that it is important and essential that we continue to keep a child's mind at the forefront of any of the conversations we're having, particularly because there's an opportunity to say, do you even know what you're saying? It doesn't make sense to punish or take punitive action when we can educate. Now, if you continue to do something, then we may have a different problem. But I think a lot of this starts with just saying, do you know what you're saying? And I think we would find out a lot of things. We'd find out if they're getting it from home, if they're getting it from peers, if it's expected for them to say this thing just to be accepted. There's so many lessons that can come from just speaking and talking to children and figuring out what's in their heads. And I don't see nearly enough of that. I've had instances of things being done to my son. I've had instances of him doing things. And when I just sit with a child and say, can you tell me a little bit more about that? That's when I find out the action that we need to take. When I was adult, I was watching a movie, Straight Outta Compton. I think everybody knows that that's NWA. And there was a scene where their manager started talking about the anti-Semitic comments that a rapper that had left the group, Ice Cube, made. And he said, he's anti-Semitic. And one of the rappers said, we don't even know what that is. What are you talking about? Mm-hmm. Again, I grew up very black and white. I did not grow up with people of the Jewish faith. I didn't know what that was. And sometimes I still don't know. So I just want to give that perspective that while we may believe it's all rooted in this intentional hate, sometimes it just ain't. It doesn't mean we don't need to address it, but it does mean we need to explore what's really going on, where it comes from, so we can end this thing. Thank you for your presentation and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Tiffany, and thank you for that vulnerability of sharing your own personal experience. I think all of us can probably come to the table with that. And I think what you just said, really, just one thing I kind of want to end with and leave it if Alan has anything else to say too, is so much of it, and the question came up here, with youth, what are we seeing? Are they really part of extremist groups? Is it ignorance? Some of it, a lot of it does come from a place of ignorance, but we also do have to remember that intent is important, but impact can sometimes be even greater important. And what is the impact it is having on various communities when these incidents happen? And so what are the next steps? How do we address it? What are the actions that we take? And with youth in particular, we don't want them to end up in these extremist groups, which unfortunately have grown tremendously. You know, years ago, 50s and the 60s, even the 70s, it was, you know, neo-Nazi groups, KKK groups. Now there are so many types of extremist groups out there that have shown up, and they are preying on our youth through gaming communities, through social media, and that if we want to break some of this cycle, we really do have to be looking at that. And so you sharing a story from your youth, it just shows us how far we need to still go. And I just want to say, I really do appreciate that. And I am really looking forward to learning from everybody else throughout this process.
No, I couldn't agree more with what Meredith just said. And I also am looking forward to hearing all of the presentations. I think the cohort was a little nervous that we went first. So hopefully didn't go too long. And, you know, it's tough to go first. So I'm glad that this has been done. I would say, Tiffany, I completely agree with you. Look, when I was a kid walking down the street, I would wear the kippah, the yarmulke. And you know, I grew up in a kind of industrial town in Connecticut. I would constantly have pennies thrown at me and you know, be called out all kinds of names. And I agree with you, Tiffany. I think people simply don't know. They don't know the impact. They don't know the history. And when you're a kid, you know, you repeat what you say. You repeat what you say to be cool. It's our job as the adults in the room to take those kids and, you know, not only to sensitize them, but in many ways to offer them an alternative to this kind of hatred, because it is, as Meredith said, the impact is terrible on all of us, and it's a terrible impact on the society itself, because it's tearing us apart, no matter if it's against African Americans or against the AAPI community or the LGBTQ community. This is tearing us apart. And this group, I think, gives me a lot of hope that we will be able to somehow in this county come together and really confront this and create an environment for our children where this kind of thing would be absolutely unheard of. They would know not to, you know, to put a swastika on the walls or hang a noose in their schools. That's where we have to get. And thank you all for this opportunity.
Bertha, you muted yourself.
First, I should know better. So before I ask Council President Glass to provide closing remarks, I just wanted to share that I've posted. I'm going to resend it because I did not send it to everyone. I just shared in the chat our website. The Muslim cohort will be having a community listening session on Monday, September 11 at 8 p.m. If you're able to join, you're all very welcome. And just to remind you that our next full task force meeting will be on Tuesday, September 19th, where the Muslim cohort will be doing their presentation. Council President Evan Glass.
Thank you, Bertha. And thank you, everybody, for a really insightful and I would say personal discussion. You know, a lot of people opened up about their lives today and their upbringings from years ago. And these are all important, right? Because we all bring our lived experiences into this discussion. And that's, you know, how we are going to find a path forward. And I think it's that dialogue that really made this first presentation a very positive one. And it was in particular the conversation and questions from our non-Jewish members. And that was the entire point. It's to listen and to learn and to bring ideas that will safeguard all of us. You know, speaking of questions, there was a question that, there is a question that I have received in numerous venues from folks in the county who are following this task force. And they have repeatedly asked, why these 6 cohorts? Why not other groups? And I said this when this task force was formed, but the reason for these 6 groups is because these are the most affected communities based on the hate and bias incidents reports from the Montgomery County Police Department. And so this is based on the data of who is being targeted, and we are trying to fix that and to safeguard everybody. And the commonalities between the cohorts, and we've only heard from the Jewish cohort today, the commonalities I think were all on display just over this weekend during the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington. And I know looking around this Zoom, a number of you were there, and you were there with your organizations. And you are not part of the Black and African American cohort. And the reason I share this is because we're all in this together. And that was on display this evening by the questions, by the interest in making sure that we all are safe and protected, and that we all have the ability to live in our community safely and to be seen for our true and authentic selves. And so kudos and my appreciation to everyone who participated in the march and the ceremony and celebrations there. Looking ahead, the next full task force meeting will be on September 19th. As Bertha mentioned, if you go onto that website, you'll see that there are a few cohort meetings in between, but mark your calendars for the next full discussion, which will be on September 19th. And if anyone has any additional thoughts, like Paula had some suggestions before, do reach out to us, share them so that we can incorporate them into the final report when that comes due in November. And so with that, I wish everybody a good night, and I look forward to continuing this discussion. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.